to the English First Additional Language Grade 11 program. Today we are focusing on language and specifically direct and indirect speech. So let's take a look at what we're doing today. For terminology, what do the following words or terms mean? Direct speech, indirect speech, and reported speech. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to try and familiarize yourself with these 3 words. Okay then, now let's look at the definitions of these words. Direct speech. Direct speech repeats or quotes the exact words spoken. When we use direct speech in writing, we place the word spoken between quotation marks, and there is no change in these words. We may be reporting something that's being said now. For example, a telephone conversation or telling someone later about a previous conversation. Let's look at a few examples. She said, "What time will you be home?" This is something that a person has actually said. It's not being reported, but it's direct speech. It's when you are actually speaking. So she said, comma, open inverted commas, "What time will you be home?" And it's a question, so we end with a question mark, close inverted commas. The second example, "There's a fly in my soup," screamed Tato. It's very important to also note that we don't always say he said, she said, or Tato said. or whatever the case is. We can use words like screamed, shouted, yelled, a whole range of different words, right? So in this sentence, it's open quotation marks. There's a fly in my soup. And then there's an exclamation mark. Now, when we find an exclamation mark, we know that the person is screaming, is shouting, right? Closed exclamation marks, screamed Tato. Let's look at the third example. Sipo said, there's an elephant outside the window. Now, Sipo said, comma, open quotation marks, there's an elephant outside the window, full stop, close close inverted commas. You will notice the punctuation is very, very important in direct speech. Let's go on to indirect speech. Indirect speech, a synonym for indirect speech is reported speech, right? So reported or indirect speech is usually used to talk about what the past. So we normally change the tense of the word spoken. We use reporting verbs like say, tell, ask, and we may use the word that to introduce the reported words. Inverted commas are not used in indirect and reported speech. So let's look at some examples. Now, she said, comma, open inverted commas, I saw him, full stop, close inverted commas. That is an example of a direct speech. It means it has been spoken by the speaker herself. The indirect speech reads, she said that she had seen him, full stop. So, basically, I'm going to say this to someone else. I'm reporting on what someone else has already said. So it's indirect speech. It means that I am not saying it. I am going to tell someone else that this is what was said. So let's move on. Right. When we use reported speech or your indirect speech, remember you have a sentence in direct speech. And now you need to use the following 5 steps to put the sentence into reported speech or indirect speech. You must remember that indirect speech is a synonym for reported speech. Okay. So as we go on here, there are 5 important points that we need to consider when we are converting from a direct speech to indirect or reported speech. We need to define the type of sentence. That's very, very important. We need to determine whether it's a statement, a question, or a command, right? You all know what a statement, a question, and a command is, and you know what punctuation marks these type of sentences end with. Then we need to look at the tense. Is it future tense? Is it past tense? Is it present tense? Is it present continuous? A whole range of tenses that we actually need to consider when we are changing from direct to indirect speech, right? And it's always what tense is used in the introductory sentence. That will give you the tense. Then the third rule, do you have to change the person? The person meaning the pronoun. Pronouns are I, he, and she. So we need to consider whether we need to change those pronouns, right? If we said, for example, Tato said it is raining. When we are going to report what Tato said, we will say, she said that it is raining. So you see Tato changes to she. That is the pronoun that we are referring to in this rule. The fourth rule, do you have a back shift of the tenses? Here, when we come to the example, that will make more sense to you in terms of the terminology back shift. And lastly, do you have to change expressions of time and place? That's also very, very important when you're moving from direct to indirect speech. So let's look at some examples now to effect the changes of these 5 points that we've learnt. Right, example 1, the direct speech is, Susan is speaking obviously, and Susan says, Susan, Mary works in an office. Now you'll see we've used colors here to show you Mary is the person that we're talking about, works is the verb, and in the office is obviously the place, right? So we want to convert the direct speech to indirect speech. So let's look here. So the introductory sentence is in the simple tense, right? So Susan says that. The reason that is in inverted commas with this little asterisk there is because that is not important. The sentence will make sense without the word that included, right? So Susan says that Mary works in an office. There's your reported speech. We could also say Susan says Mary works in an office, and it makes sense as well. So that could be there, it's right, and if it's not there, it's also right. So please remember that when you are converting from direct to indirect speech. So let's go on. The introductory sentence is in the simple past tense. Here we'll say Susan said that again. Mary, but this time instead of the works that we use there, we say worked in an office. So that is your simple past tense, right? The verb will change to accommodate the tense. Let's go on. How to use reported speech example 2. If there is a pronoun in direct speech, now we're looking at the pronoun, the I, the he, and the she. It has to possibly be changed in reported speech depending on the situation. So let's look at the example very quickly. Right? Direct speech. Susan is speaking now. So Susan says, I work in an office. The reported speech would be Susan said. Again, that is optional. She worked in an office. Remember, I changes to she. So that is your pronoun change there that we were talking about. Okay? Here again we said the I changes to she. Remember that when we are talking about changing the pronoun in reported speech, when you are directly speaking and you're talking about yourself, you said, I did this and I am doing this and I work here. But if somebody is going to go and say that you said something, they would say Susan said that she worked there, or Susan said that she did that. So you understand that you are talking about Susan, and Susan, the name Susan is replaced by she within the reported speech. So let's go on to the next rule. The third example. This is the back shift that we spoke about earlier on that I said we would come back and look at, right? It explains itself better when we're doing it in an example. If there is back shift of tenses in reported speech, the tenses are shifted the following way. Now we're talking about shifting tenses back and forth, right? So let's look at an example so we understand the concept better. Direct speech. Temba, I work in the garden. So Temba is telling somebody that he works in the garden. If we need to report what Temba said, the reported speech would go like this. Temba said that. Remember, said and that is optional. He, you see, the I changed to he, and work becomes worked in the garden. So we are putting it in the past tense. We are saying Temba said that he worked in the garden. So it's very, very important to note that when we shift the tenses, we can back shift the tenses. Where Temba is saying he works in the garden, I work in the garden is present tense. But we've shifted the tense to past tense. Remember, we are reporting on what Temba had already said. So now we are saying Temba said that he worked in the garden. All right. So moving on, we look at the fourth example. There is an expression of time and place in the sentence. That's also very, very important. It may change depending on the situation. Right, so we need to consider these three things when we are also converting from direct to indirect speech. Andile, I worked in the garden yesterday. Now, worked is already in the past tense, and yesterday, well, is also referring to something that has already happened. So Andile's sentence here is in the past tense. When he spoke about where he worked yesterday, he was telling us that he did it yesterday in the garden. Now, with the reported speech, if we look at it here, we will say, Andile said, remember that is optional, whether that is there or not, the sentence still makes sense. He worked in the garden the day before. We don't say yesterday, we say the day before. Okay guys, there's a lot of information for now. Let's take a quick break and we'll see you on the other side of the break. Hi, welcome back. Let's see how much we've learned in the last section. Reported speech. Now we're going to quickly do some examples so that we can see whether we've managed to understand direct and indirect speech. I'm going to quickly read out the questions and then I'm going to give you 3 minutes to try and figure out what the answers are before we have a discussion. So we're going to start with all the direct speech, right? The first one, I said, I'm not happy at work. The second one, they said they're going home. The third one, he said Jane will be late. The fourth one, I've been working, she said. And the last one, what happened to make her so angry, he asked. Now I'm going to give you 3 minutes to figure out what the answers are. So you need to take these direct speech quotes and convert them to indirect or reported speech. So let's start. 3 minutes starts now. Okay, now let's see how well we've done with the answers. The first question, I said I'm not very happy at work. Let's look at what the answers have in store for us. I told her I was not very happy at work. So do you see? I told her instead of I said. I was not instead of I'm not very happy at work. Happy at work remains the same. I hope you got that. Let's look at the next example. They said we're going home. The answer? They told us they were going home. Do you see? Said becomes told us, and where becomes they. And going is still there, but we're going home. So do you see the changes in the 5 rules that apply with the back shifting of the tenses? Okay, let's look at the third example. He said, Jane will be late. Then we look at the indirect speech. He said that Jane would. Okay, would. Will changes to would be late. That was a very simple one. He said Jane will be late, and the indirect speech is he said that Jane would be late. Let's look at the fourth example. I've been working, right? If you look at this whole thing here that's highlighted, I've been working, she said. Instead of starting with she said, we are ending with she said. So now let's look at what the answer has in store for us. She said that she had been working. Okay? I've been working changes to had. She had been working. It's very, very important to take care of your tenses when you are moving from direct to indirect speech. Now, let's look at the last example. What happened to make her so angry, he asked. Again, we are ending with he asked, and this is a question, remember? So let's go back and look at the answer. We look at the answer, it says he asked. Now we're starting with he asked here, we ended with it, right? What had happened? Had happened. You see, what happened changes to had happened to make her so angry. To make her so angry remains the same. So he asked, what had happened to make her so angry? It's very, very important that we note that when we are reporting that on something that has already been said. So naturally the tense will change. So we must be very careful of that, and we must also not forget that there are words that we either add or subtract to report from direct to indirect speech. So let's move on. Right, there's another activity for you where we're going to rewrite direct and indirect as reported speech. So here again, we've got 4 examples. Practice makes perfect, so the more we practice, the better we're going to get at this. So the direct speech is given to you, and we need to now convert that into indirect or reported speech. I'm going to very quickly read the 4 examples for you, and then we're going to give you 3 minutes again to figure out the answers for yourself. I'm sure by now you have a hold on what the concepts are all about. So let's look at it. I said, I'll meet you here tomorrow. We've given you some clues by the highlighting, right? The second one, she said, I do not wish to discuss it at this moment in time. Okay? And the third one, he said, I want it now. Last one, I finished the job 3 weeks ago. The boy protested. So let's give you 3 minutes, and after that we will look at the answers. Are you ready? 3 minutes and counting. Okay, let's look at the answers and let's see how good we're getting at direct and indirect speech. So looking at the first one, I said, I'll meet you here tomorrow. Let's look at the answer. I told her I would meet her there the next or the following day. So what are we saying? We're saying I told her I would meet her there the next day, or we could say I told her I would meet her there the following day. Okay, we can either use the word next or following to describe the day. The next example, she said, I do not wish to discuss it at this moment in time. Let's look at the answer. She said she did not wish to discuss it at that moment in time. Okay? So at this moment in time becomes at that moment in time. That's very, very important for us to know. This becomes that. Then going on to the next example, he said, I want it now. And now in the indirect speech, we would say, he said he wanted it then. And if we say then, we can just put a full stop and it ends there. Or we can say, he said he wanted it at that moment. You see, we have two answers here and both are correct. He can either say, he said he wanted it then, full stop, or we can say, he said he wanted it at that moment. So now has two options when we are dealing with indirect speech. Let's look at the last example. I finished the job 3 weeks ago, the boy protested. Now I'm sure you understand what the word protested means, okay? He's not very happy about what he's saying, so he's protested, he's angry. That's what protested means. It's also describing the way he is talking, right? I finished the job 3 weeks ago, the boy protested. So let's look at what the answer is all about. The answer, the boy protested that he had finished the job 3 weeks, not ago, but before. The boy protested that he had finished the job 3 weeks before. So do you see 3 weeks ago now changes to 3 weeks before because we are reporting. We are reporting on something that has already been spoken. Hence, the tense must change. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is dealing with key concepts, and before we get started with this, we're going to take a very quick break and we're going to come back so that you absorb whatever we've done so far, and then the key concepts, we can kick off with that after the break. See you after the break. Hello and welcome back. Let's get started with the key concepts that we were talking about before the ad break. So, when we're looking at key concepts, right, we need to consider the typical changes to the demonstrative, adverbs, and adverbial expressions, right? This is going to be very easy and very simple as we work through it. You will see, yes, I know that, I just don't understand what the terminology is. So let's go and look at what the terminology and the changes are when we change from direct to indirect speech. Okay, so moving a little further down, we look at this. This will change to that. This is happening now, that will happen then. We look at these, will change to those. Remember, it's past tense when we're doing indirect or reported speech. Now will change to then. And then yesterday will change to the day before. It's very, very easy. Once we get a hang of it, it actually becomes second-hand knowledge for us. Tomorrow will either be the next day or the following day. Both are correct for tomorrow. So tomorrow, we can either report it as the next day or the following day. 2 weeks ago now becomes 2 weeks before. Remember the example we had? 2 weeks ago becomes 2 weeks before. And lastly, here will become they. Okay, so we need to consider that when we are changing from direct to indirect speech. So let's go a little further on, and we have another activity for you. Here you have to complete the statements for direct and reported speech. But here what we're doing is we're looking at both direct and indirect speech. So sometimes you might have an example where you need to give us the direct speech, and sometimes you have an example where you need to actually give us the indirect speech. So now we're testing your skills on how to convert a sentence from indirect or reported speech into direct speech as well. So let's look a little further at this. What we're going to very quickly do, there are 4 examples, and I'm going to very quickly give you 3 minutes to actually take a look at these examples, and thereafter we will work through them when you are done with the activity. So let's start very quickly with your 3 minutes so that you can actually answer these questions to the best of your ability. Okay, let's see how well we've done. The first example, we had to create the direct speech was David is talking now, right? David says, there is an excellent band playing later on. We needed to convert that into reported speech. Thereafter, the second example was direct speech. We need to actually find the direct speech for this, where the reported speech was Christine said that she had seen Amy at the bank on Monday. The third one, we needed to actually do a reported speech there where the driver says, I'm going to turn right at the traffic lights. Right? And then the last one, we needed to convert that into direct speech. Jonathan said he had returned the dictionary to the library. So now let's look at the answers and see how well you've done. Okay. The first one. David, there is an excellent band playing later on. That's your word there. Those words you need to look at. The reported speech should have read, David said. Remember, even if you said David said that, it would also be right, but it's not necessary, right? David said there was an excellent band playing later on. The later on remains, right? The next one. The reported speech we had there said Christine said she had seen Amy at the bank on Monday. So we needed to report this in direct speech. Christine, there's your colon there, open inverted commas. I saw Amy at the bank on Monday. Then we got our full stop and we got our close inverted commas. Remember, when we are converting from reported or indirect speech to direct speech, it's very, very important that we ensure our punctuation is correct. We have to use the open and closed inverted commas. We can use the colon, or the colon can be replaced by Christine said, comma, and then you start open inverted commas and you complete your sentence. Let's look at the third example that we had. So here we needed to convert direct to indirect speech. The driver, remember, it could also read the driver said, comma, open inverted commas, I'm going to turn right at the traffic lights, full stop, close inverted commas. Now we needed to create that into reported speech. So it means that I'm going to go and tell somebody what the driver said. The driver said, remember again, that is optional. The driver said he was, there's your tense, going to turn right at the traffic lights, full stop. So we are actually telling somebody what this driver said, okay? That is basically what indirect or reported speech is all about. And last example here, we needed to convert the reported speech into direct speech. So here we need to get our punctuation together. So the question was, Jonathan said he had returned the dictionary to the library, right? So we need to convert the reported speech into the direct speech. So there we go. We say Jonathan, we can say Jonathan said, comma, open inverted commas, which would still be right, or we can say Jonathan, colon, open inverted commas, I've returned the dictionary to the library, closed inverted, it should actually be full stop, closed inverted commas. This is actually in the wrong place there, but it should be that there. Okay, there's a little typing error there. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's look at key concepts when it comes to tenses, right, with examples. Remember, there are different types of tenses that we have. We get the simple present and the simple past, the present continuous, the past continuous, the present perfect, the past perfect, and it goes on and on like that. But let's look at these tenses with examples, right? If we talk about simple present tense, the example we have, I never eat meat, he explained. The simple past tense would be, he explained that. Again, that is optional there. Remember that, right? He never ate meat. Eat changes to ate. Present continuous. I'm waiting for Anne, he said. He said that. He was waiting, right, for Anne. Present perfect. I have found a flat, he said. Past perfect, he said. Remember, that is the optional word there. He had found a flat. Found is in the past tense already in the direct speech, so it remains found in the past perfect tense as well. Let's look at the present perfect continuous tense. He said, I've been waiting for ages. Then we now need to convert it into the past perfect continuous tense. He said that he had been waiting for ages, right? It seems like time just stops with many of us at some point. Let's look at the simple past tense. I took it home with me, she said. I took it home is already in the past tense. Then we need the past perfect tense. She said he had taken it home with her. Had taken it home. Remember, I just opted not to say that to show you that whether that is there or not, it still makes sense. We could have said she said he had taken it home with her, or she said that he had taken it home with her, are both acceptable. Right, let's go a little further down. Future tense. We all know the future tense, but we never know what's happening in the future. He said, I will or shall be in Paris on Monday. Now, when we put the slash there, the sentence can read one of two ways. He said, I will be in Paris on Monday, or he said, I shall be in Paris on Monday. That's basically what that means. Now we're looking at a conditional tense, right? He said that he would be in Paris on Monday. Okay? Here there's only one answer, although there were two types of questions there, but basically the same question said in different ways. Future continuous. I will be using the car myself on the 24th. There should be a T there. She said, I shall be using the car myself on the 24th, she said. So, the conditional continuous tense that we're looking at here, she said that she'd be using the car herself on the 24th, okay? Then let's look at the conditional. I said I would like to see it. The conditional again, I said that I would like to see it. You see, it remains the same in the indirect speech, however, the punctuation is dropped. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Now, we're doing key concepts here, time and place. When we're doing direct speech, today becomes that day. Now becomes then at that moment or at that moment. Yesterday, the day before, days ago, the day before. Last week becomes the week before. Next week becomes the following year. Tomorrow can either be the next day or the following day. Here becomes there. This becomes that. These become those. Ago becomes previously or before. Both are acceptable. Tonight becomes that night. Okay? So we must watch our tense changes when we are converting from direct to indirect speech. We also look at these simple ones here. Will becomes would. Can becomes could. Must or have to will become must or had to. Both are acceptable. May or might becomes might. Should remains as should. Ought to also remains as ought to. Let's go on. Okay, the other key concepts when it comes to the pronouns that we need to consider. I becomes he or she, depending on whether it is either male or female. Me, when I'm referring to myself, can become him or her when you're doing reported speech. Remember, when you're talking about yourself, you say myself. But when someone is reporting what you have said, they can't refer to you as me or myself. They have to either call you him or her because they are talking about you. Right? Then we look at mine. Mine also changes to his or her. Myself becomes himself or herself, also depending on the gender. We look at we becomes they. Us becomes them. Ours becomes theirs. Ourselves becomes themselves. Okay. These changes, with practice, we will get it right. However, for now, these are just a few notes that I thought we should actually look at, right? You, when you are referring to you in direct speech, it becomes either I or we. Because remember, the word you is singular and it can be plural, okay? So you must remember the word you can be used for a single person or for many people. And you, hence, is now singular or plural. Hence, in the reported speech, it's either I or we, okay? Depending on whether it's a singular you or a plural you. Then if you look at the word yours, becomes mine or yours, ours, sorry. Yourself or yourselves, which is many, This is singular and this is many. Becomes myself if you refer to yourself, or ourselves if you refer to yourselves. Okay, it's a bit of information overload, but it's very, very important to note when we are doing these changes from direct to indirect speech. So let's move on to the next slide. Right, now we're going to quickly talk about tips you need to remember when you are punctuating direct speech. Okay. When using direct speech, remember this is now where you are going to say something. In your writing, you need to use the correct punctuation. The exact word spoken must be enclosed in speech marks. Your speech marks are your open and your closed inverted commas that we are referring to, right? Then, the first word of the speech must begin with a capital letter. This is the law of grammar. There's no way around it. When we start a sentence, we must begin with a capital letter. But we are talking about our reported speech. So if we write I here, it must be a capital letter. Then the words in the speech marks must be separated from the rest of the sentence by a comma. That's very, very important. So we must use a comma before we start with the inverted commas. Remember I said we can either use the comma or we can use the colon, right? That's only if you use the name without the word said. When the word said is not there, we can use the colon. You must use a new line when a new speaker begins to speak. That's also very, very important. Okay, so that's all for today, guys. I hope we did well and you understood what direct and indirect speech requires from you when you are working in whichever way you need to go. All the best. Thank you.